And we are, yes. Welcome to our Google Hangout on Full Circle PD Professional Development. Our hashtag is 360PD, and we're going to begin with a few introductions tonight. But tonight's topic of conversation is continuing cultivating the whole student in our learning environments. I am Rick Rowe. I'm a high school math teacher and honored to be part of this 360 PD crew. Eric?
And I'm Eric Turner, and I'm a high school teacher at alternative school in Tennessee, and I teach all the social studies subjects.
And I am Tammy Neal, and I am a computer apps and game design teacher from Branford, Florida. And I will be handling the Twitter feed tonight for most of the evening.
Therefore, Eric, I believe we're going to start with question 4 or 5. Did we make that determination?
5, I believe it was.
Okay, we're going to start with 5. So the question that we were pondering was, identify a specific example where you saw a student take on a leadership role in our learning environments. Eric, did you want to respond to that? Do you want me to start with that?
Well, in my particular situation, it's difficult and it's challenging is the word I want to really use for a student to pick up that leadership role because there's so much peer pressure in an alternative school environment to not play into the system, so to speak. You know, there's a lot of peer pressure for these kids to not do that. In a regular school environment, I imagine that there are quite a number of students who might enjoy that kind of a role, but in our environment, they try to play under the radar. They try to not look like they are part of the system, and they just want to get through it and get out of it. We try to get them, we try to encourage them to take a leadership role, especially the students that are in levels 3 and 4, which we have a level system, and so the higher up you are in the level system, the closer you are to getting to go home somewhat. And so we try to encourage those leadership roles. Doesn't always work, but I can think of a few instances where students have certainly provided the example that is necessary for leaders to provide. While they may not take an active role in telling students or encouraging other students to behave in a certain way or to do certain things, they certainly provide an example in how they do it. One student in particular, we read to kindergartners over the internet, and one student in particular has, well, while she was with us, she took an active role in that environment, and she was present every time we read. And so she provided that example, and she was just very excited about doing that kind of thing. We have tried to provide situations where students, some of our high school students will tutor our middle school students in math, particularly, and we only have one middle school teacher, and so she occasionally needs help with some of the middle school students on math, and so we've encouraged a couple of our high school students to help in that regard as well. And these are certainly leadership positions, leadership roles that are taken, and while we don't actively call them leadership, because of the situation we're in, that's what they are. And so we hope that it will spread and other students will take up the mantle as well. So that's all I'm going to say about that.
Eric, it sounds like they are being examples. They might be student role models, but they're demonstrating qualities that are like those that lead.
Yeah, well, you know, when you get right down to it, a leader has to set the example. And then coming from a military background, there were the three things called be, know, and do. So you have to be a leader, you have to know how to be a leader, and you have to do those things that a leader does. And the biggest thing a leader does is set the example. You can say you're a leader all you want, but when it comes right down to it, are you doing those things that set the example of what a leader should be? Also, something students need to know, and teachers for that matter, is that to be a good leader, you need to be a good follower. You know, and you have to be a good follower first before you can be a good leader. You look at any leader who has been a great leader, and I can guarantee you that they were a great follower first. So it takes a good follower to be a good leader. And so by setting those examples, they are certainly setting an example of what a leader should be and how they should behave.
And just to add to that, Eric, they're having influence. These students are being influential to others, and isn't that a great characteristic of a good leader?
Certainly. And another thing that it shows our students in particular is that they have a contribution to make. Not a negative one, but a positive one. So many of our students often believe that the only contribution they can make to any environment is a negative contribution. And we're trying to turn the tide on that by showing that, no, you're not a negative influence. Don't make just a negative contribution, but you make a positive contribution. And a leader, whether it be a student or a teacher, they need to show other students or students in general that the contribution they make is a positive one. But when you are a leader, you have to set them up for those positive successes. You can't just tell a student, be a leader. Okay, so how am I a leader? Well, now you're setting them up for failure, and that's not what a leader does. A leader sets their people up for success, and so when you're wanting a student to move into a position of leadership, you have to set him up for that success. You have to set him in a position and put him in a position where he's going to be successful, and he knows that you have his back and that he's going to succeed. You know, you got to crawl before you can walk, and you got to walk before you can run. And we're setting them up to crawl first, and then to walk, and then to run. But you can't make them go from 0 to 60 within that first, couple of seconds. They're not a Challenger or a Mustang.
Eric, one question I have for you is, if you are one of your students, what is it about them, what is it about being a student there that might hold you back from rising above? Why is it somewhat difficult to step out and be influential? And is it taboo?
A lot of times it is. It depends on the crowd that we've gotten into the school, but a lot of times it's simple peer pressure. They come in from the surrounding schools, and so they may or may not know other students there. And any time that you're in a new situation, you're going to stick with what you know. It's going to be much more difficult to peel away from that. They know them from the social scene in the local community. And so it's hard to move away from that kind of peer pressure. So even if they want to rise above the rest and they want to rise to the top, it can be difficult. And sometimes you have to take the step of saying, look, go ahead and keep your reputation. Be the bad kid. But let me set you up in such a way that you can do these good things that your friends don't necessarily have to know about. And that can be difficult for a teacher to do, because that means you have to go and look for those things that his friends won't know about. But when a student does something good, whether it be mentoring middle school students, or rather tutoring middle school students in a subject they're good at, or it's simply breaking down stuff that needs to be broke down and take out to the trash or whatever, that makes them feel like they make a positive contribution. That leads to positive self-esteem. You can tell a student they're good. You can tell a person that they're a great person. And all the self-esteem mumbo jumbo that you hear about in education nowadays, but until that student actually does something, that action, it's the action that leads to the internalization of the feeling. So we can talk about leadership all we want, but until you can set a student up for those things, you're still just talking.
Then let me follow up with this to either you or Tammy. What can we do as educators, or what can students do as educators to create influence? What can educators or students do to create the desire for a student to no longer be satisfied with the status quo of being the smart kid or the challenged kid, but actually step out after they've been set up for success? What might we do to promote that, empower that, if we can?
Tammy, I'm going to throw that your way. I know your mic is muted.
Okay, so I think that we have to provide those opportunities in such a way that that our students may not necessarily realize we're guiding them yet. And it's a very fine line between guiding and forcing. Can't force it. You absolutely can't force it. You have to let it happen. You have to be willing to see. You have to be able to see the opportunity and step out of the way sometimes and let the experience happen. Our homework was to see those leadership roles happening. We'll see those qualities in students around us, and like we said in our little warm up before we got started today, I got to see that in the last couple of weeks. I've seen a student who most people would not consider a leader in our campus, but watch him quietly move himself to helping someone else, and I don't think he even realizes what he's doing. And what I had to do was get out of the way and let that collaboration happen. And many times teachers are the ones who have to have so much control in our classrooms that collaboration is not going to happen unless we say, okay, you can work with this person. I don't want you working with this person because y'all are going to get off task. Well, maybe that off task is not off task. Maybe it's thinking outside the box.
One thing I'd suggest is when you have those students and you see an opportunity where they could illustrate some sort of leadership potential, is give them a choice. Tell them, and by choice I don't mean do this or else. What I mean is, hey, let me offer you some suggestions about some of the things you could do. And then just like Tammy said, step back and you know what? Act like you don't care. Act like it's just, hey, you know what? I'm just going to throw this out there. Take it, if you want to. Don't take it if you don't want to. But then watch them. Now, I know in a regular classroom that takes some doing because there's so many kids. And so in my environment, it's a little bit easier to do that with fewer students. But once you watch them and then you find that one point in time where they do what you said or suggested, and then you say, hey, let me just take them aside or whatever and say, I saw what you did. That was awesome. Don't take credit for it. Don't say I'm glad that you did what I suggested or anything like that, but give them all the success because they own the choice. They own the opportunity. You don't own it. They do. And of course, sometimes with some students, it can be as small as them opening a door for somebody. It can be as small as them saying please or thank you. Because when you're dealing with students who have never been taught how to be polite or courteous, then those are steps forward rising to the top. Now, that's not necessarily, some big leadership role, but it certainly is for them, perhaps. So give them a choice. Let them own the choice. Act like it doesn't matter to you one way or another. And then when you do see it happen, then you go ahead and tell them that, hey, I saw what you did. I saw. Now, maybe nobody else saw, but I saw. That's pretty awesome.
So, Eric, you're saying...
You'll see a big smile because they like to be noticed,
So we create the opportunity for them. We give them that chance to do it their way, and we watch how they manifest their influence and their choice about executing whatever it is, right?
Right. Let them, I guess what we're saying is essentially you just provide the suggestions, and then they can expound upon it however they want to. They can build on it. They can take away from it. They can do it their way, And I mean, that's really what you want to see is when you're talking about a whole child, because that's the thing that they're going to take outside the classroom. What I really enjoy is when I talk to students who have been in my class, and they talk about things that they've done outside the class that aren't even related to social studies, but just character-wise, whole student-wise type stuff. That's positive character building, affirming type stuff. And that's really the biggest joy I have.
To see them bring their outside character into the classroom.
Well, that and taking what we've learned inside the classroom in terms of character development, taking it outside the classroom and treating others with the same type of ability. And again, when you're talking about character development or leadership development, you have to talk about problem-solving steps, because part of being a leader is solving problems. And those problems can be, they're not even grandiose. They can be as simple as, how do I get through this teacher's class without strangling the teacher? And sometimes for some of my students, that can be a serious issue. I mean, these are things that they talk to me about. Mr. Turner, how can I get through Mrs. So-and-so's class without yelling at her? Well, that's a problem.
Coping,
right. Let's go through the problem-solving steps and see how we can confront this in a way that you can get through there and deal with it. And that's a leadership role for them, because it's going to train them to be a better person, to be that kind of a leader that can, because the thing is that they know everybody else is looking at it, especially when they're the troublemaker. They know it. And sometimes they like that. But as an informal leader, they have to know basically when not to do that kind of a situation. And I'm not saying that there's never a time to not stand up to a teacher. Maybe there is a time that you stand up to a teacher. But you have to know when, and you have to know where, and you have to know how. And that's one of the things that I do teach my students is a matter, it's the time, manner, place type thing. But that's a whole other discussion, I guess. But those are leadership type things.
Let me offer just a couple of things that I've seen since we came back from February vacation about student leadership emerging in our classroom. We have moved into a brand new building, and I said I don't want to do what I've been doing in the old building just in the new building. I want to be more innovative. I want students to own more of the learning, and I want the students to surface as more contributors. I want them to have more of a voice, and I want them to be more centered in the learning. So I've been trying to start the discussion with some prompts and then ease myself back and let them merge, yield, and take over more of the facilitation, more of the questioning, more of the discussion. And in the past few days, I have found it intriguing. I found it exciting, so much so that some of the students yesterday and today said that they noticed the difference and they actually liked the new style to learning. And I said, why? And they said, well, it's actually more fun and it's more engaging. And I can't put words in their mouth, and they didn't say because we're doing more of the talking, but there was a lot less of me speaking and a lot more of them speaking, and they were almost fighting for who was next. And I really liked that. Finally, I went back and I sat on the windowsill while they took over the class and then just kept going. So I saw them emerging. I asked for a facilitator, and a facilitator just got up out of their seat and then sort of took over the class. And I thought that was really exciting.
Rick, you teach math. How much discussion is there? And 2 plus 2 can only equal 4. It's not going to equal 5 ever. How much of an argument is there for this, you know?
Let me give you a brief for instance today. We were talking about central tendency and mean, median, and mode. And I say, guys, let's just say that the mean is such and such and the mode is such and such. You give me data. You provide data to us that substantiates that. I don't care what your data is, but let's try to create a set of data that works for that. So they had data to support it. Somebody else had something different. Somebody else had something different. And I think it was good to discuss, Eric, that there are many different questions for that answer, if you know what I mean, because we were working backwards. And they liked that I wasn't telling them, this is the data, let's get these answers, but actually these are the answers, what could the data be?
So that's how you provide a structure, and that's the kind of structure environment that you provide so that they can create innovatively in the classroom.
Well, I tried to, like I said, work backwards. I tried to say, for example, we had a graph. I said, tell us about this graph. What data is behind this graph, and how do you know? So we thought totally differently, but they took over more of the discussion, the questions. Could it be? I don't know. You tell me. So rather than me doing most of the conversing, they were interrogating, they were asking questions, they were pulling stuff out of the discussion, rather than have me just dictating what was going on.
What other examples, Rick, do you have that you can think of where you provide, I don't know, specific examples of a structured environment where you, that permits your students to
collaboratively learn?
Yeah,
or to
collaboratively learn, I guess, and that kind of a, where you're involving more than just one aspect of your students.
We have our students actually sitting together collaboratively in either groups of 4 or 5, mostly 4, and I have found that since they sit with their peers, they sit with those that they're comfortable with, they influence each other, they ask each other questions, they help each other. They say, wait a minute, I got such and such, you got that, how did you get that? And they're problem solving. And I think, Eric, those are amazing skills for high school students to impromptu work through, because they're sitting together next to each other, not in rows or columns, if you know what I mean, but
Right.
They're sitting together and they're asking each other questions. Wait a minute, how did you even start this? I don't even know how to start this. What did you do?
You see, now you also have some Twitter hashtags for your classes, don't you?
I do. I have one for each of the courses, so whenever students have a concern or I have something that I want to share, we include that hashtag in the tweet so that anybody in class who wants to know if there is a discussion going on, they can look for that hashtag.
Do you ever see discussion going on outside of classroom about something that you guys talked about inside classroom?
I have often seen that, and students might be sitting, for example, on the sideline of a soccer field waiting for a scrimmage or practice, whatever, and they will put a question out there, and before I have a chance to respond to it, somebody else in class responds to it.
Do you see them using the things that they've learned in your classroom, and not just math type stuff, but those collaborative type of abilities, those whole student type of abilities, those leadership roles? Do you see them using those things that they've learned in your classroom and other classrooms as well?
I'm going to generically say I remember maybe a half a dozen students who have said, based upon the different type of learning environment that we have in math, they said we have become better students in our other classes because we're asking more questions, we're working with each other. They're not just sitting there as buckets ready to be filled. They're actually more aggressive in their learning with each other, asking the teacher, challenging the teacher. So they said our environment has helped them to become more involved, more engaged, and better students in some of their other classes. Thoughts?
Well, I'm just wondering about maybe a specific example, because we often hear platitudes about getting them to do things. My students really do X, Y, Z, and then they do this, and I'm just wondering about a specific example, an anecdote that you can provide, maybe not this week, but maybe next week, since we're running out of time, that this is specifically what I teach my students. Because I often hear you speak positively in your classroom, and I think to myself, man, I would love to be able to do that. And so what I really want to hear is that specific example of this is what I do. And I see every single time that I do this, and you're a math teacher, so you know,
I got an example for you, Eric.
X plus Y, and this always equals Z.
The best example I can give you is when a student asks a question, a specific pointed question, I try to return it with a question by not answering it and saying, well, I don't know. Could we do it that way? Could we solve it? And they'll say, well, let's factor this, or let's do this operation. And I'll say, okay, why do you think that might be a useful thing? So I'm engaging them in a questioning process to help them with problem solving. They can take that into any class. They can take that into any situation outside the school and learn how to communicate through questioning to resolve their issues.
A Socratic method type of thing, where you're returning a question with a question.
Oh, okay, sure. Because I don't want to answer their question, Eric. I want them to think it through.
Exactly, and I agree with that. I hate to answer questions. Matter of fact, my students will tell other students, don't ask him a question because he won't answer it. He'll just tell you how to find it or something.
But they're learning.
I'm right there with you. I'm gonna feed. You can lead a horse to water. Or wait, you can feed a fish, or you can fish for him. But hey, Rick, let's make some homework for next week.
And Timmy wants to contribute.
Tammy has her mic on mute.
So one of the things I did just today, Eric, I teach Microsoft Office to most of my students, and so I kept watching them ask each other basic, how do I do this? How do I do that? Things that I want them not asking each other. I want them to be able to find the resources. And so I stopped everybody and I said, okay, before you can ask someone else, you have to see if your answer is available either in the F1 button, which every piece of software has an F1 button, or can you find it online? Go ask Google. If you can solve the problem yourself, don't ask someone else for it.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
And so I am trying really diligently. Don't ask your neighbor before you've asked the computer. Once you've asked the computer and you can't find it, then ask your neighbor, and then ask me if the two of you together can't find it. But I'm trying really hard to foster that that personal responsibility of, I don't need someone else to give me the information. I know how to find it for myself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just quickly, and because I know we're almost out of time, it's about accessing information. And I told my seniors today, guys, if you're not sure, Google it if you need to, pull it from our textbook if you need to, and then consider asking somebody in your collaborative group before you ask me. So see if you can find it somewhere, resolve it, look it up in the index, look it up in the glossary, look it up in the table of contents, Google it, anything they did today in class and got the answers that they were looking for.
You know,
And I thought, see?
I know we've kind of moved a little bit off the subject a bit, but I think so many teachers are scared of saying, Google it. Find the information yourself. But honestly, that's what everybody does. You know, that's what people in businesses do. That's what people in government do. They Google it. Now, I don't want to say that's a cure-all, but Googling it, in other words, searching for the information on the internet, that's part of life nowadays. The thing that we have to teach as teachers is to filter that information that you get from that response to find the best information. So yeah, they can search it all they want. They can Google it, they can Yahoo it, they can Bing it, they can do whatever they want to find the information. But our job is to say, yeah, that information that you see right there, you might not want to use that, but let's find out why. Or that might be better, but let's find out why. So there has to be a filter there, and if we're not providing that ability to teach them that filter, then they can't use that outside the classroom. And when you get right down to it, when you use a textbook, and I do the same thing, look in the table of contents, look in the glossary, look in the index, look in the chapter headings and stuff like that. It's the same thing. It's just manually doing it. You're Googling the book. So what's the difference?
So Eric, we want to encourage them to access the information in any way that they can and then validate what they're getting to see if it is actually useful and appropriate for their question.
Right, and that does go to whole student type of stuff, because this, again, we're talking about the ability of a student to use the information outside of school and in their regular daily life. And that is a whole student type of concept. So, you know, I say we're kind of getting off the subject, but at the same time, it's a peripheral, I think, part of the subject, and so it's still therefore technically part of the subject. Anyway, go on.
I was just going to say, and therefore students communicating collaboratively, questioning, accessing information, this is wonderful in any aspect of life, in or out of the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about homework for next week, Tammy. What do you got for us? Anything?
I think that looking at the questions that we have posted that are coming up, I think that we need to look at our question 8. It would be a really good question for us to start to think about in our in the next 2 weeks or so. We'll be live in 2 weeks, which is, what would your students say you do daily that give them a voice in their learning? What would your students say that you do that gives them a voice?
So we're talking about concrete.
Yes.
Yep.
Not something platitudish.
Not a platitude. Not a, well, I'm always here. My door's always open. No. Yeah. What specifically? Rubber meets the road. What specifically do you do?
There we go. Okay, so that's our homework for next week.
For 2 weeks from tonight.
2 weeks from tonight. So
2 weeks from tonight. We will be live again on the air in 2 weeks, ladies and gentlemen. Putting a call out to our viewer tonight. She chimed in on Twitter, and we want her to chime in more often because we know you're watching. So take it easy, everybody. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.